Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Nick Fletcher from the Conservative Party to start the proceedings.
Good evening. My name is Nick Fletcher and I am the Conservative Party candidate in the forthcoming general election. People obviously want to know bits about us as individuals, and so I'll briefly go through my working life. I was born in Armthorpe and I was educated in Armthorpe, and I stayed there until I was 3 years old. I did an electrical apprenticeship after leaving school when I was 16 at Doncaster Plant Works, and I did my further education in electrical and electronic engineering at what was then Doncaster Metropolitan Institute of Higher Education. At 22 years old, under a Conservative initiative, I set up my own business as an electrical contractor. And we've just recently, this past 2 months, celebrated 25 years in business. I employ 35 people in Doncaster, and Doncaster's been very good to me. I believe in conservatism. It's something that runs through me, and I believe that the Conservative initiative at the beginning helped me become a successful businessman, but also helped me become one of the good employers in Doncaster. I employ lots of apprentices. In fact, most of my staff have been trained through me, and we've managed to keep hold of them through good training. On the doorstep, I'm selling conservatism at the moment, and I'm selling Brexit. And I can sell it because I truly believe in it. I believe we are the only party that have got a result for the country for Brexit. And so when I'm knocking on doors and they're asking me, why do you want to get into politics? Why are you doing what you're doing? I'm doing it because I believe in Conservative values, and I believe that the Conservative Party has the answer of Brexit. And so I believe it's the only party that people can really vote for at this moment in time. Thank you very much.
Okay, and second, Caroline Flint from the Labour Party.
Thank you. Let me tell you about me. My mother was a lone parent at 17. I never knew my real dad. We never owned a home. When my mum married, in our first flat, I shared a room with my sister and my parents. Twice in my teens, I lived away from home. The second time because of my mum's alcoholism, an illness that would kill her. University wasn't my destiny, it was an escape. By my mid-20s, sadly, I found myself on my own with 2 children under 2. I know what it's like to be on benefits, to not have enough money, to find it hard to find a job and childcare, and to find a secure roof over your head. I never thought I would be a Member of Parliament. Over 40 years in the Labour Party and 22 years as your MP, I still work hard to prove myself. As a hands-on constituency MP, a community campaigner, and someone who can hold her own in the House of Commons on Question Time and even with Andrew Neil. The choice for Don Valley's voters is between a strong, hard-working MP who keeps her promises and always puts Don Valley's towns and villages first, and an untested Tory candidate. I live in Doncaster. I put my kids through state schools here. I've held 1,700 advice surgeries, and I've helped over 25,000 people. This is the Brexit election. In 2017, I promised to respect the referendum. I voted 3 times to leave, more than Boris Johnson. I voted against my own party 21 times to deliver Brexit. And if you re-elect me, I will vote to finish the job and move on. Because I want to also stand up for Don Valley over rising NHS waiting times, unaffordable social care, the shortage of police, the lack of investment in the north, and tackling the climate emergency that we face. That's something this government has ducked for the last 9 years. Thank you.
Okay, and next for the Liberal Democrats, Mr. Paul Horton.
evening. My name's Paul Horton. I'm standing for the Liberal Democrats in neighbouring Doncaster Central. I'm completely new to politics, like many of the people on this platform this evening. However, I also have a background in business, fixing things. The day job is actually about startups, fixing businesses, maintaining businesses, taking them to sale. That's what I do, and I've done that for 15 years. I like to think if you have the right information, the right decisions kind of make themselves, really. I've got 3 kids, 18, 16 and 13, so similar to many of the young people here tonight, looking out on the same landscape as you are. I am obviously standing for the Liberal Democrats because I am a passionate European. I have managed to live and work and study in Europe, where I had the chance to learn another language. I think that with all the extra information we now have, 3.5 years on from the original referendum, we do need a second chance at a second referendum. That's my position. Because I believe we spent 60 years of some of our best talent building a unique place in the European Union with a unique set of opt-outs of things that we don't like and a unique inclusion with the things that we do. I also believe in liberalism, which I define as that blend of personal liberties with collective responsibility. The Liberal Democrats, well, the Liberal Party, did set up the original welfare state in 1908 with old age pensions, and we've always had that interest in investing in superb public services. So that's why I'm standing, and look forward to answering your questions later on.
Okay, and now Kate Needham for the Green Party. Thank you.
Hello everybody, I'm a local girl, my name is Kate. My dad was a mining engineer, my husband was a miner, I was a teacher. I've recently bought a shop in town which I'm turning into a vegetarian cafe, and the reason I'm standing for election in Don Valley, there are 3. First of all, Remain. I campaigned for Remain because I think it's the best place for us is in Europe. I think we're a strong country in a strong union within Europe, but I think that we do need to have another referendum now, a mandatory one, to just decide it for good, because we've been given a really poor choice. The second and most important reason I'm standing is because we need to tackle the climate emergency. That's the most important thing we need to do. And I've been an anti-fracking campaigner for many years in this area. The whole of Doncaster is licensed for fracking, and we have iGas right on the doorstep who still want to develop up to 60 wells in this area. Boris had said that he'll ban it, but I don't believe that's a real ban. I think it's just a temporary thing and will soon disappear. When you look around Doncaster, we're looking at airport expansion, massive road building, lots of building new houses everywhere, great big warehouses springing up everywhere, and also drive-in fast food takeaways that are just encouraging people to drive and eat fast food. None of those things are going to help Doncaster to tackle climate change. The council recently announced that they declared a climate emergency, and we've recently also managed to get a Green Party member on the Climate Commission, so hopefully we can, set them on a different path. The third reason is austerity, the NHS, and cuts. We cannot have another 5 years of those kind of cuts and that kind of austerity. There are 4 million children living in poverty now. This just can't go on. Thank you.
Okay, last but not least, Mr. Paul Whitehurst from the Brexit Party.
Thank you. My name's Paul Whitehurst. I was actually born in the constituency a couple of miles up the road. I went to school at Doncaster Grammar School, which turned to Holcross Comprehensive in my final year. And then after leaving school, I worked in the area in Doncaster, in Leeds, and then in London. And at the end of the 80s, I took a bit of a career change. I went to work in Europe, first of all in Germany, selling American specification cars to American soldiers stationed there. And working all around Europe, in Italy, Spain, Hungary, Belgium, Holland, into Turkey, and then in the early 2000s I set up my own business serving the US military and diplomats in the Middle East and in the Far East, selling actually Swedish cars to the American soldiers in Japan and Korea. In 2015, like an awful lot of people in this constituency, I voted to leave the European Union. And since that time, we've gone 3 or 4 years nearly, and we still haven't left. And the reason I got into politics was that very reason. I was just talking to one young man here, so when did you get into politics? And it was probably about 2 or 3 months ago. So I'm completely new to this game, like a few of the people on this panel. And it's been an interesting journey so far, I can assure you. But one of the other main reasons of me standing is that I have, later in life, I started a family. And I'm concerned for the future of my kids. We decided to move back to the UK, and we settled here in Doncaster. And so I want to establish a future for them that they can have the same benefits as I did when I was growing up. Thank you very much.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that, panel. So now we're going to go out to you guys in the audience. And if you could stand up, it's a bit like sort of the Price is Right, isn't it? So if you could stand up, Mr. Paul Cutts, and if you'd like to ask your question on Brexit.
Right, my question to the panel is, in the 2016 referendum to leave or remain in the EU, how did each of you vote in that referendum? Did you follow your party line?
Brilliant, thank you. So I think just to keep the sort of order, we'll start off alphabetically, then later on we'll sort of mix it up a little bit. But Nick, if you'd like to respond, please.
Yeah, I voted to remain in 2016. The reason why I did that is I run a business, and I thought immediately that it might have, well, I basically saw what was going to happen. I had 2 or 3 years of uncertainty. If a married couple was getting divorced, it would take 2 years to split a house, a car, and where the children would live. So I knew Brexit would cause uncertainty for the country, and I hate to say that I'm right, it has caused uncertainty for the country. Having said that, if the vote was to happen again, and I really hope that it doesn't, but if the vote was to happen again, I would vote leave. The reason why is because we had a democratic vote to leave. And above all else, we must respect democracy in this country. So I know people will be upset if they voted remain. I know people will be upset thinking that they're not being listened to. But the most important thing, and I say it and say it and say it again, is democracy. If we can't change things in this country without putting a cross on a piece of paper, then we are in serious, serious trouble. Lots of people talk about how bad it will be after we've left the European Union. Nobody's saying how bad it would be if we stayed after the country has said leave. So leave, we must leave. And we have a deal. And with a majority Conservative government, the deal will be brought before Parliament before Christmas. It will be passed through, and we will leave on the 31st of January. And then as a nation, we can start building bridges with each other, and we can move on. But it is so, so important, and we must show the younger people that we respect democracy, because if we do not respect democracy, we will not get people to the polling booths. And if we don't get people to the polling booths, then nothing will ever get done. This is so, so important, so, so important. And the only way to achieve Brexit is to vote for me, vote for the Conservatives, and let's get Brexit done.
Caroline, please.
Well, I voted Remain and campaigned for Remain in Don Valley in 2016. And as I was campaigning, I met obviously people who were voting Remain and many more who were voting Leave. And what I always thought at the time was that this was an issue that divided opinion here and elsewhere, but each side had their own reasons for choosing to vote the way they did, and I respected that. As soon as the referendum was over, I made it very clear that we had to honour the outcome. I made that pledge again in 2017, and you have before you an MP who has been tried and tested on this in the last 2 years. As I said in my opening remarks, I've voted for a deal 3 times, and I do believe we should leave with a deal because I think we should leave in an orderly way. I think we should have a relationship going forward that allows us to take on board many things that we can do on our own, that we used to be subject to the EU. But I also think it's important to have a cooperative relationship with our EU cousins. And if we can get a deal through after we return to Parliament, then we'll have the transition phase to go through trade and security and other matters in more detail, and nothing will change during that period. But what has concerned me, as a progressive, as a Democrat, is finding myself sometimes caught in the hard place between hardline Brexiteers who feel we can just leave without a deal and it'll be all right, and to be honest, hardline Remainers who, with hardline Brexiteers, no deal was ever going to be good enough. And it's odd when I found myself on one of these votes in a different lobby to Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg, but also Caroline Lucas from the Greens in the lobby with them and members of my own party too. Rightly or wrongly, I did what I thought was right, and I still think is right, which is why if I'm re-elected, I will vote for a deal to leave, so we can get on and move on, and remove this polarisation of this debate, this lack of compromise, which I think is causing huge hostility and anger within our country, and is stopping us focusing on some of the other big issues that we need to address. And if we can do that, I think things will simmer down. A lot of the uncertainty that presently businesses face and others can be better dealt with. But to leave we must, and I hope that's going to be with a deal.
Thank you. And Paul, please.
Hello, yes. So, like several people on this platform here, I wasn't a member of a political party in 2016. I voted Remain. I became a Liberal Democrat precisely because I believe passionately in remaining in the EU. I totally agree with Caroline. We need a settlement. We need to resolve this. So this election, I will absolutely abide and be happy with the result, whatever it turns out. But I do believe that before we make that final decision, we need a second chance to reconsider. It's quite common for my clients to come to me and say, should we do this? And I say, well, if you do this, then this and this and this will happen. And for people to rethink, I do think a rethink is entirely justifiable within the democratic system that we've got. We're being promised a deal, but the word deal gets bandied around. There's multiple deals. This is merely the withdrawal agreement. This is merely who gets the house and who gets the car of Brexit. There will be deals and deals and deals to come. We're going to be, I think, on a treadmill of probably 10 to 20 years of deals to get this all resolved. I think we need to go into that, if we do, with our eyes open, and I passionately believe that it's not too late to change our minds. I'm also concerned about the breakup of the United Kingdom. I'm passionately British to an extent that I think is unfashionable these days. I love our union. I want a strong union of United Kingdom within a union of within the European Union. I do even wonder if Brexit is frankly deliverable. It's not happening in a vacuum. There's a strong Atlanticist drift towards this, turning towards America. I think when the British people finally see lowering of animal welfare standards and potential involvement of US big pharma in the NHS, I do think the Brits are going to come out on the streets. I'm not sure this is going to resolve anything. I disagree profoundly with the statement, let's get Brexit done. Let's get Brexit started, perhaps, but we're not done. We're not done for a long time yet, and I believe it's not too late to maybe have a rethink. That's my position.
And now Kate, please.
Well, I've been on a massive learning curve with Brexit. At the time of the vote, I was living on a boat, I wasn't on the electoral roll, I was busy looking after an elderly, my mother who had Alzheimer's, I had other things on my mind, and to be honest, I didn't really take it that seriously. It seemed to me it was just an argument within the Conservative Party, and the whole thing was just David Cameron trying to iron that out. So I did do some campaigning with the Green Party for Remain, handing out leaflets in town and that kind of thing, but I didn't actually vote, and I wish I had. And I've learnt over the last 3 years that the European Union is a real force for good. I believe that it's helped us to keep the peace over the years. I think it's a massive opportunity for young people through Erasmus to travel, to study, to work, and to just explore Europe. I think that Brexit has caused a lot of division, and it was wholly unnecessary. And I think that we were really let down. People voted in good faith based on the information they had at the time, and then everyone just scarpered, and we were left, just 3 years of a complete mess. And the deal that we finally seem to have got now, I just think it's not a very good deal for this country at all, and I don't see why we should just have to accept a deal that's actually going to be bad for us. The initial referendum was advisory. I think we need to have a second referendum, put whatever the final deal is back to you, the people, and have it as a mandatory vote, and that's it. Whatever that is, that's it. And I think that if we do leave, it's just going to cause an awful lot of problems for small businesses. That I was speaking to someone on the doorstep the other day, and her business is already in real trouble, and she says it's because of Brexit. So I just think it's a mess. Let's have a second referendum, find out what we think about the final deal. Thank you.
Okay, and to Paul for the Brexit Party.
I think you can guess from the name of the party how I voted. But unlike 4 of the other panellists here today, I voted to leave the EU. I did that because I wanted to take back control of our laws, take back control of our borders, and basically regain our sovereignty. And since that time, we've had 4 years of scare stories about of project fear of how things are going to collapse. And realistically, some of the options that the political parties offer at the moment, such as a second referendum, just won't work. This is, as Nick mentioned, about democracy, about a vote, and the right or the loser's consent is at risk here. If we don't follow through on the vote of the British public, especially in Don Valley, where 69% of people voted along with myself, we are risking democracy itself. And having a business which exports EU goods to outside the EU, I don't see it as a problem. I see it as an opportunity. I see it as an opportunity for our country to grow. And I'm fully behind it, and I am very confident that we will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to our next question. So this is from actually one of our students, which is great. So this is from Anna Russin.
Doncaster has recently taken steps towards tackling climate change. However, transport still remains one of the greatest emitters of CO2 emissions here. What would you do to tackle this issue?
Thank you. So we'll just trying to change the order slightly. So I suppose it's appropriate if Kate, would you like to start with that as a Green Party?
Yeah, sure. Well, recently Doncaster Green Party did a petition in town to try and bring back a little nipper electric bus to do a circuit around town to take people from the bus station round to the market, up to Waterdale and then back again. There did used to be one, and when it was knocked off, the local traders and the market traders said that it affected their trade really badly. And so we think that a little electric bus to do that would help people to get out and about. It would get people not just shopping in the big shops in the French Gate, but actually spending money with local traders and keeping that money in the local economy. And also it helps with things like social isolation. You know, people can go out and have a nice day out and get around by bus. So that's one of the little things. We're hoping it's going to grow from a little acorn into a much bigger thing. Places like Harrogate already have a free electric bus service. It's paid for by advertising, so it can be done. And I think by practically showing that this can be done, hopefully, Doncaster Council will take it on board. I presented it to the Mayor, Dan Jarvis, the Mayor of Sheffield City Region the other day, and it is looking hopeful that we will get funding for that. So that's just one little example. And the Green Party is all about trying to use the least damaging form of transport possible. So starting with walking, we would invest in footpaths, and cycling, we would invest in a network of cycle routes so that it would be easier and safer for people to get around, followed by cars, like electric cars, public transport, comes before cars. So we would have investment in electric buses and public transport and trains, and then electric cars. But all of this infrastructure needs to be put in place. I'd love to have an electric car. Even if I could afford one, I've got nowhere to plug it in. So there's an awful lot of work, an awful lot of jobs that could be created by putting that infrastructure in place in Doncaster. Green jobs, meaningful jobs for the future. Going on to like the airport, I'm dead against airport expansion because that is really not very good for the climate emergency. Don't want to stop people flying at all, but I don't think we need to expand any further. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if Paul, for the Brexit Party, if you'd like to come in there.
Well, climate change, it's a very big issue. There has been initiatives to subsidise the cost of electric vehicles. One thing that was mentioned there about bus services in Doncaster are very hit and miss depending where you live. There is some areas in Doncaster which have little or no bus services going to their areas. I was in Highfields in North Doncaster the other day, and there is no bus service which services them. So certainly things like that need to be looked at pretty much immediately. If people can't take public transportation into town, that's obviously going to encourage more people to drive. Regards trains, we do need to increase the electrification of trains in the area. We were subsidising the South Yorkshire Transport many years ago, which encouraged the building of the trams, or the reopening of the trams in South Yorkshire in Sheffield. But very little money was spent here in Doncaster. So whether it's possible to do that with the road networks that we have into Doncaster, I'm not sure. But it's certainly something that needs to be looked at for the future.
Thank you. And then we'll pass over to Nick, please.
Yeah, the Conservative manifesto states that it's going to spend £1 billion on infrastructure for new car charging. I actually own an electric car. My wife's had one for 3 years, and we've just toured Scotland in our electric car. So the electric charge points are there, and they are ready for us. The £1 billion will make them more accessible, so that there's more charging points in the certain places. There's also been £500 grants for each individual person who's wanted a car charging point placed in at home. So we are actually working towards this, but it will be a gradual process. It cannot change overnight, and it's obvious it cannot change overnight, and we have to be realistic in what we want to achieve. Obviously, we can't all just scrap as cars, and that would be unenvironmental to do that. So we need to phase the diesel and the petrol cars out and gradually bring the electric ones in. And as we gradually bring these in, then the infrastructure will get better and better and better. But we are actually putting the money there, and it's in the manifesto, and it's £1 billion. So it is there for us, and I suggest that if we can, then we all use it. I mean, most of the cars in the next 5 years are going to be hybrid, which is a step in that direction. I mean, I've been out recently delivering leaflets and canvassing, and when you're near the schools at pick-up time and all the engines are going, the diesel engines are going, the pollution is really bad. So we've all got a responsibility to to help each other with this and switch his engines off, and then as soon as we can afford these electric cars, and they will be coming down in price, as soon as we can afford these electric cars, then we should all make that change. And the sooner we do it, the better.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and on to Caroline, please.
The scale of the challenge requires us to radically restructure our economy to one that is cleaner and greener. And we need to do that to basically save our planet, but also for us to be able to create the jobs and opportunities for young people who have yet to find a career, but also for those who are currently working in areas where they have to change. That their skills in engineering and other skills can be refashioned into different types of industries that still will provide transport, but will do so in a way that is compatible with our ambition to reduce our emissions. And you're absolutely right, Anna, about emissions from vehicles. It is one of the biggest problems. And I agree with everything that has been said about electric cars, about more buses, about looking at biofuels. We actually have a green gas plant, I have to say, business just up the road here in Don Valley. But actually, it can't be done in a piecemeal way. There has to be a vision that involves serious money. 1 billion isn't going to cut it, quite frankly, Nick. One that recognises that we need to reach levels of, for example, 3% of our GDP going into research and development, so that we not only create the skills and the intelligence to understand what we can produce in the future, but once we've done that, we can actually set up the manufacturing bases here as well. We are the windiest country in Europe, I'm told. And Siemens and other firms have assisted both with onshore and offshore wind, but why don't we have the manufacturing here as well? So it is of that order that we need to address this problem. And when it comes to floods that we've experienced recently, some of that is man-made about the way we plan and build in our communities. Some of it is undoubtedly, I think, caused by what's happening with climate change. But again, that is another area where government policies in the last 9 years have affected things detrimentally. There's been a 15% cut in money for flood defences. And the final point I would say is this. Crossrail in London, the amount of money going into that is equal to the total amount of money going to transport in the north. If we are going to improve our transport system, not only for access, but so it's greener, we need devolution of the powers and the money to sort the problem out here.
Paul for Lib Dems, please.
Thank you, yeah. Yeah, I too drive a plug-in hybrid, so a trip to the charge point's a daily event for me, trying to do as many miles as I can on electric. One of the reasons I have become interested in politics is the issue of deliverability, like what can be done. And I think the Lib Dem manifesto presents a vision of what can be done. They have a policy of a £130 billion capital infrastructure investment programme, and green energy is earmarked to get a large proportion of that, with the effect that by 2030, 80% of Britain's electricity should be generated from green sources. Now, that's the precursor to then turning off all the machines in the UK that emit carbon, because ultimately that's the only way we're going to stop climate change, I believe. I reckon there's probably 80 million of them. There's cars, trucks, light vehicles, boilers, cookers. You've got to turn them off. You can't turn them off until you've actually developed your electricity generating infrastructure which can actually replace them. I believe the Lib Dems have a policy to do that, to get Britain's electricity supply almost carbon free by 2030, and then, in their manifesto, the policy of banning the sale of internal combustion cars and light trucks and vans in 2030. You then let nature take its course, as it were, and all these machines just get to the end of their natural life. Another element of the 130 billion infrastructure programme is to electrify the remainder of Britain's railways as soon as possible. The wonderful thing about electric machines, electric transportation, is it gets greener over time. As the electricity supply network becomes more and more biased towards green and renewable energy, you buy buy a car and it just gets greener and greener and greener as coal-fired power stations are phased out and other forms of non-renewable energy. So I think the Lib Dems have a realistic policy, one that is absolutely deliverable, and which will seek to see Britain become carbon neutral by 2045. Just to touch on a few incidental points, the Lib Dems do believe in banning fracking for good, and we do believe in spending $5 billion on flood defences, and I should certainly be working to ensure that Doncaster gets its fair share of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, hello panel. I've known Caroline for several years. I think I met her at Edlington Police Station in 1997 when she first got elected.
97 was that?
97, that's right, yeah. There has been a recent poll last week, the YouGov poll, NRP, which basically says that there's been a big swing towards the or against the Labour Party in Don Valley. Do you agree with that poll, Caroline? And what are your comments on it? And if you do...
Is that just for me, this question?
Well, it's for the panel, because obviously I've looked at the figures for each of them. And if it is true, is it down to your stance on Brexit, or is it down to the leadership of the Labour Party?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that seemed very pointed towards Caroline, so it makes sense that Caroline starts the response, if that's okay.
Well, polls are polls. Look at the polls before 2017 when they got it not quite right, and actually look at the poll for the 2016 referendum, which didn't get it right either. Look, I have never taken the voters of Don Valley for granted. I've never had a majority like some Labour seats of 20-odd thousand or more, and I've always worked very hard. One of the things when I became the MP for Don Valley, I discovered that actually there wasn't a lot of canvassing done, and with respect to everybody in this panel, I've yet to see anybody from any other party actually really knocking on doors. The Labour Party in Don Valley for the last 22 years, in every election, locals, European, even police and crime commissioners as well as MPs, we go out and try to earn our vote. And all I can say to you, Darren, is that undoubtedly Brexit is an issue. Of course it is. It'd be ridiculous not to suggest otherwise. People in Don Valley are frustrated. They're frustrated with Parliament. They are frustrated with politicians who promised this would be sorted and it hasn't been sorted. They're frustrated with people who made promises and haven't kept promises. And all I can do is work hard and keep my promises. And as I've said to many a person on the doorstep, it's not often you have an MP who just 2 years ago made you a promise and can stand on your doorstep and look you in the eye and say, I've been tested, I stood by you, I voted to leave with a deal because I thought it was the right thing to do, and I'm asking you to now back me. Let's see what happens. Doncaster's a racing community. It's who crosses the finishing line that counts.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll pass across to Paul for Lib Dems next, please.
Hi. Well, I believe it's called an MRP poll, isn't it? And I forget what it stands for. But I believe they have called using this methodology previous elections pretty accurately. However, I would agree with Caroline again. It was taken 3 weeks before the actual vote. There's been a string of polls this week that show perhaps the Labour Party gaining on the Tory position, the Tories' lead narrowing. We don't know until the final aria, do we? We don't know. So it's all to play for. I just want to applaud, actually, everybody turning out tonight, and I want to applaud the different, approaches here on this table, because this is democracy in action. You have a real choice, and the most important thing is that people turn out and exercise that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so Kate, please, for the Greens.
Well, first of all, I'm quite cynical about polls. I'm not convinced that they are that accurate, and it sometimes feels as if they're there to influence rather than, be so accurate. Talking to people on the doorstep, People are very, very confused, and a lot of people have still not made their minds up who they're going to vote for, so it's all to play for. And I think one of the main problems is that people are having to vote tactically. They're not feeling like they're able to vote for who they'd really like to, because there's a power struggle between the two main parties, I would say, and that's because of the first past the post system that we are stuck with. I think it's really out of date, definitely needs reforming. We need some form of proportional representation, a bit like we had in the European election, which worked pretty well, so that people can vote with their heart rather than having to kind of weigh up, we'll do, and vote for the least worst option rather than who they really want. So that's what I would say about that. And Brexit. Brexit is just really confusing as well. I'm just really sad that Brexit is taking over when there are so many really important issues that we should be addressing, like the NHS, like austerity, poverty, homelessness, all of these things. And of course climate change, which on the doorstep is also a big issue for people. And we can't really waste another 5 years not tackling climate change. Everyone's talking about it, but if you look at what's actually been happening in government, not very much. We really need to crack on with it. Thank you.
Okay, and now Paul for the Brexit Party, please.
Well, I'll agree, polls are polls, but just to say, there is 45,000 houses in the Don Valley constituency, so the chances of running into Caroline has been pretty slim so far, but I can assure you that we have been out there speaking to people on the streets and in the doors, and in answer to your question, from my own personal experience, yes, there has been a drop in the traditional Labour support for the Labour Party, predominantly because of the brand of the leader. A lot of people out there we've found in discussing have found Jeremy Corbyn as a toxic brand for the Labour Party, and traditional Labour heartlands who have always voted Labour for the first time considering voting for another party. However, and this is where the difficulty rises for them, the people in these constituencies have long memories. They remember the miners' strike of the 80s and the 90s and the Thatcher government, and as much as they don't wish to vote for or lend their vote to the Labour at this present moment in time, they also find it near on impossible to vote for the Tories. So the good thing for the Labour voters in these areas is that in April the Brexit Party was formed, and we provided them a party for a voice that could be heard. And so, whereas I don't believe in the results of polls, and there's been some very skewed ones recently, the only poll that matters is on the 12th of December. And I'm very confident that the people in these areas who will not vote for Labour will lend their vote to the Brexit Party and will be very successful.
And elect Tory.
And across to Nick then, please.
Well, I hope the polls are right. There's a website called Electoral Calculus, and it actually comes down to constituency level, and it shows us leading on there by 4.5%. And I have been out every single day since the election was called. And the word on the street is that the Labour voters are moving over. They're tired of it. They don't like the leader that Labour have got at the moment. They don't like their position on Brexit. Well, they actually don't know their position on Brexit because Labour don't know their position on Brexit. And they're lending us their vote. It is coming over. They know that we are they're pretty sure that the Conservative Party are going to form a majority, and they want to be part of that. Don Valley has been Labour since 1922, and I'm afraid it's been taken for granted that it's been a Labour seat. It's been taken for granted for too long. And a Conservative MP with a Conservative government can do wonderful things in this neighbourhood. It will shake it up. It will shake it up no end. We will end up with a lot more ward councillors that are Conservative, good ward councillors that are Conservative. It's time for this change to happen. The time is now. And with your help, with your votes, we can turn Don Valley blue for the first time in 1922, and we can get Brexit sorted.
So my question regards private schools. As I'm sure
sorry,
you're aware, this marvellous institution is a private school. And I've been looking at, I can't name the particular party, but a certain party's policy that has that is basically saying that they want to introduce a tax of 20% on top of the private school fees. And also, a lot of the party members at the particular conference voted to ban outright private schools. I'm not going to lie, I found that quite scary and rather worrying. So I just wondered where each of you would stand on that particular policy and what you would vote to do, whether you go with your party or whether you go with your heart and maybe even your head. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I went right out there straight away. Thank you for that. I was wondering if there's going to be a follow-up for the previous question, but we've sort of jumped ahead. So we'll go straight in there. So just to reiterate, that was Oliver asking about status of private schools. Obviously, you know, where we are, that's an absolutely pertinent question. So we'll change the order slightly again. So if, Paul, you'd like to start with that for the Brexit Party?
Okay, well, as you're probably aware, Labour will close all public schools and even take possession of the buildings, I believe was their policy at the conference. But what that's going to do is it's going to introduce 600,000 pupils such as yourself into the state system, a system which is already bursting at the seams from 8 to 10 years of uncontrolled immigration, where we have class sizes now which you wouldn't recognise in this school. It's also going to increase the cost to the British taxpayer of about £6 billion to incorporate you into the state system. And it's also a policy of total hypocrisy, because there is quite a number of front bench Labour MPs and even backbench MPs who benefited from a private education themselves, and also those who have sent their own children to private schools. So they have one rule for themselves, but now they want to bring everybody down to the same level, which has been going on for years when they got rid of grammar schools. So my personal opinion is we can't afford to accommodate the people from private schools, not forgetting that your parents are already contributing towards the private school system anyway through their taxes, and then choosing to pay for their own for your own education on top of that. My party has no issue with that whatsoever, and neither do I personally.
Okay. So next, if we could ask Kate to reply to Ollie's question, please.
Okay, well, my priority would be to bring the level of funding up in state schools so that we also have smaller class sizes. Green Party policy is to achieve class sizes of 20 eventually. We'll be looking to put £4 billion per annum into the education service to help achieve that. We'd also do things like children wouldn't start school until they're 6 years old, and previous to that it would be more like play, and they'd go to like nursery schools and learning through play rather than it being tests and that kind of thing. And we'd also ban Ofsted. And I do believe that we would do away with the charitable status of private schools, but I'm not quite sure about anything else that we had planned. I haven't heard of anything. So mostly for me it would be about just putting more funds into the state school system, because I think the cuts have had a really bad effect. I was a teacher, a head of department in fact, in a big comprehensive school, 1,750 students. My husband taught in a small private school, so I do know what the two kinds of schools are like. I know that a lot of students that went to his school wouldn't really, they just didn't do very well in the state school. It was too big for them, and they did much better. They thrived in the smaller private school. But I also know that my budget was cut from £6,000 a year to spend on materials right down to £2,500. which, you know, just had a massive detrimental effect on the way that we could teach. So, and his budget for his school was like 10 times what mine was. So I'd be interested in just making that a bit more equitable.
Okay, and then to Paul for the Lib Dems, please.
Okay, yeah. I went to a comprehensive school on a council estate. Actually, that was my upbringing, and all my kids have gone through state school. So that's how I've arranged my own life, and how my parents arranged it for me. As a liberal, I do believe in civil liberties, and I do believe that if you were to ban state schools, you're effectively just telling people what they can and cannot do with their own children's lives. Now, I find that overreach on the part of the state, so I am not in favour of banning private schools. I am, however, 100% in favour of the maximum investment possible in the state sector, which again is costed in the Lib Dem manifesto. 20,000 new teachers, part of the 130 billion again, restoring perhaps worn out school buildings, building new ones where appropriate, investing to the maximum in the state education sector. But no, personally, I don't think you can turn around and tell people what they can and cannot do with their children's education. That's my personal view.
Thank you. Now to Caroline.
Well, as I said earlier, I'm a product of state school education, a comprehensive state school education, and so are all my children, who all went on to university. They were all schooled here in Doncaster, and they had a good education. What do I believe? Well, Oliver, I think private schools aren't charities. I think they are a business, and they should be taxed accordingly. Having said that, I don't believe actually abolishing them is an answer in all of this. And what the Labour Party policy is in our manifesto is to actually address some of those tax loopholes that exist that treat private schools as a charity when they're not. Secondly, it says that the Social Justice Commission should do a review. It's quite interesting over the last, I would say, 20 years, how often what we hear from the private school sector is how they want to avail themselves to the state school sector with their facilities and services that they've got. So some private schools do quite a lot of integration already with the state school sector, and I'm sure that is very welcome within the communities where that operates. But I do believe, like any other business, you should be taxed accordingly. Just like if I sent my children to a state school as I did, but then I wanted to buy private tuition on top of that, I would have to pay for that, and there would be VAT added to it. And I think the same should apply to private schools. Ironically, we're sitting in this building that is only here today because of the work I did to make sure that actually RAF Finningley didn't become another prison, because that's what it was earmarked to be under the last Conservative government before '97. And if it had have been, we wouldn't have been having this debate tonight. It might have been the prison canteen. Instead, we have the airport, and we have 100 businesses that are operating on this site, and of course, Hill House is one of those businesses.
Thank you. Okay, and now to Nick, please.
I think Labour need to decide whether they want to ban them or tax them. I suppose they might try and tax them after they've banned them, but there you go, that's just another...
I just told you what the policy was.
Yes.
I just told you what the policy, read it in the manifesto.
Yes, well, I'll read it eventually. If we tax private schools, there's an awful lot of people that send their children to private schools who cut out an awful lot of things in their life. They cut out holidays, they cut out nice cars, they cut out all the kinds of things. They get no rebate on their council tax for that, and no one expects any sympathy for them. I'm not giving them any sympathy, but they choose to pay that extra money, and that extra money is just like an additional tax. So if they want to do that, then let them do it. But the 20% VAT would probably make it so expensive for people that they couldn't keep it up. So that you would end up with an awful lot of children who go to this school going into the state system, and the classrooms that have got 30 children in, 30 plus, would end up with 40 children in, We've got to have somewhere for these children to go. So if people can afford to and they choose to spend their money, then let them do it. I do agree that state schools need extra funding, and we are giving it. If you read my manifesto, you'll see that it's in there. And what we should try and do is bring the state schools up to private school standards, and that's what we should be doing for, not trying to bring the other way around. I didn't interrupt you, Caroline, so please don't interrupt me. This school in itself, I believe, brings about £6 or £7 million into this borough, and it's a wonderful thing. And it's important that these schools remain part of the education system within this country.
Okay, so this is quite interesting. I think we'll take a few points between the panel, if that's okay. And Ollie's, as in a lesson, sparked lots of debate. So Paul, would you like to? And then
Can I just on school funding? Nick talked about putting more money into state schools. And actually the truth is, and this is what's I think important to understand about how at a national level people can play fast and loose with figures. The overall pot for state funding of our schools has grown, but the amount per pupil has gone down. And the new plans in terms of Tory funding for our state schools will mean that 83% of schools will see a cut per pupil next year. That's the reality. And maybe, part of the answer, look, people can choose what they want to do in terms of where they educate their children. In fact, most people who use the private education system, at some point, their children are in the state sector during their school lives. But actually, maybe, if we could get an alliance of people to come together about what we need from our schools, and maybe the input of some of those people in the private education sector might create a lobby to force governments to recognise that from the early years right the way through, we need to have teachers who feel supported and paid well, smaller class sizes, and actually for all children, for wherever they come from, they don't have to rely on paying for education to get a good education.
Thank you. Paul, would you like to make a...
Only just, this may sound a bit technical, but I deal with VAT every day of my working life. And exemption is an
Very interesting, man.
Education is an exempt supply as under the VAT Act 1994, so it may not be actually deliverable to apply VAT on education unless you leave the EU, because VAT is a European tax. It's just a question about what is deliverable. Promises can be made, but are they actually deliverable?
If we leave the EU, we set our own rates for VAT.
Well, you said that is true, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So, we're in a school, and if children are the future, how are you going to ensure that early years childcare providers can sustain provision, given that providers are only going to receive a 2% increase over the next 5 years, at the same time that wages, pensions and business rates are all increasing at higher rates?
Okay, thank you. So that was Oscar, not Helen, asking the question, just to clarify. Thank you. Yeah, just in the case there's any uncertainty there. Okay, so in terms of starting off, Paul, if you'd like to start off the Lib Dems. Please.
Yeah, it is a flagship policy of the Lib Dems, you will have heard it, to introduce free childcare 48 weeks a year from the age of 9 months for parents that want it. It's obviously to support women who want to go back into work if they choose to at that age. It's an absolute flagship policy, and it's been costed. The Institute of Fiscal Studies have had a look at the Lib Dem costings, and they have determined that they are fair and that this is affordable. So it's an absolute priority to put money into early years childcare. It is actually an interesting point about the minimum wage. I think we've had too much recently of governments putting up minimum wage and yet not giving organisations that pay people, care providers, education providers, councils, enough funding to actually literally pay people the enhanced minimum wage, which is now £8.21 an hour for a 40-hour week. Although once you've added holiday pay and national insurance onto that, it's actually £10 and a penny an hour. pension, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you cost it all out, it's £10 and a penny. So investing in early years education is vital, and from a government that is aware of the full costs that providers actually face. So I am confident that the Lib Dems have costed that, and that it is an absolute priority to support early years provision from the age of 9 months with realistic costed policies. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul, for the Brexit Party, if you go next, please.
The Brexit Party doesn't have any policies on social care or young childcare, because we're under no illusion the Brexit Party is not going to form a government this year. However, we are hoping that we could prop up a government, or like the Liberal Democrats did in 2010, we could be part of a government where the tail may wag the dog. And in certain circumstances such as that, we'd have to look at policies which would encourage more childcare in the communities. My own kids had childcare from 3 years of age, I believe. I think it's now reduced to 2 years. And I've got to say, it's pretty much impossible for people to go to work and look after children, or to pay for the children to go into care. So I think Paul's policies for the Lib Dems are very good as well. I mean, I like to share lots of people's policies. For the minimum wage for somebody who's taking care of children, it may be something that needs to be looked at. I would certainly, if I was involved in it, I would look at that. There's too many costs involved for people to look after pensions and things like that. But as a company, as a party, we don't have a specific policy on that one. My own personal views, as I've mentioned.
Thank you. Okay, and just to sort of mix up the order a little bit, so Nick, please.
Yes, childcare, I understand it's expensive and it's needed. We are going to double the amount of free childcare that's available, and we're also going to help the people in the armed forces with childcare, because they need it probably more than most with moving about. As regards to the minimum wage, I understand people want more money. The problem is with minimum wage, and we do have to be careful with it. I'm not saying I'm against it completely, but we just have to be realistic with it. I employ a lot of people, and they're all on different rates. So the problem is, if you put somebody who's just started out, who's fairly new at the job, and you put them on a high wage to start with, then everybody else who works within that industry realises that the money that they're on, and they want an equivalent raise. And before you know it, you've put the entire workforce structure on a massive pay rise. Now you go, well, that's fantastic, everybody has a pay rise, everybody loves a pay rise. Until you go to the pub and you buy a pint of beer, and it's not £4 anymore, it's £5. You go buy a loaf of bread, it's not £1, it's £1.50. You go and fill your car up with fuel, it's not £1.20 a litre, it's £1.40 a litre. Because everything that we buy, everything that we do, is moved about, is built, is put together, is sold by people. And so everyone loves to brand these minimum wages around, and we try and sell this to the younger people. Oh, you'll be on £10 an hour, you'll be on £10 an hour. But unfortunately, that £10 an hour, when you get to the shops, it's only worth what £9 an hour was worth before. I also believe in that when you give people wage rises, it's good for people to strive to wage rises. If you just give people a wage rise every single time, what's the point in striving? What's the point in trying to work harder? What's the point in trying to work better? Coming up with different ideas to help a school, with different ideas to help a business. If you're just going to get a wage rise continually without asking for one, someone's just going to give you another £1. We're just going to give you another £1. Or it's an election, we'll give you £2. And that's what we need to be scared of. Populist governments that try and sell these things need to be really, really careful. And that's just a point in case with childcare, is that obviously if the people that are looking after your children, their wages go up because of minimum wage, then it's going to cost more for childcare, it's going to cost the tax purse more, and so on and so forth. So I do understand it. We are going to try and help. We are bringing in a national living wage, and I think it's a good thing, but I do think we just need to be careful how far we take this, and that we're not just trying to buy votes with it.
Okay, thank you, Nick. And then we move on now to Kate, please.
Okay, if you put money in people's pockets, they will spend it in the local economy, and the whole of the local economy will get better. So I don't buy that whole argument about suppressing wages. If people work hard, then they deserve to earn a living wage. The Green Party policy is for £12 an hour, and that's for everyone from 16 years upwards. Why should a 16-year-old, do the same work as someone older and get much less money for it? Also, we have a policy where the highest paid worker in a company would only earn 10 times what the lowest paid worker would earn, and that would help to equalise wages. Nobody needs to be earning more than that, I don't think. We're in a situation where 1% of the population owns half of the world's wealth. So something somewhere is wrong, The Green Party policy also is for 35 hours of free childcare from the 9 months upwards to enable people to get back to work and earn some money that way. Also, for small businesses to help, the national insurance would be lower. The Green Party has a policy of increasing employers' allowance. At the moment it's 3,000, so we put it up to 10,000, and hopefully that would help smaller businesses to afford that. Cuts. Under this Tory government, we've just had cut after cut after cut, and people are really struggling, and the council has been cut almost in half, I believe. We've had £50 billion worth of cuts to local authorities, and they're struggling to meet the needs of social care and stuff like that. So the Green Party would put £4.5 billion into the social care budget because it's really necessary. Also, the carers allowance would go up under the Green Party. It's 3,200 at the moment. It would go up to 4,630 with the Green Party. And the big, brand new progressive policy of the Green Party that I believe will actually happen eventually is universal basic income. And universal basic income would replace the horrible means-tested benefits that we have at the moment, where people are having to wait weeks and weeks before they get any money. So every single person would get £89 a week, and pensioners would get £178 a week. There'd be more for people that live on their own and pensioners that live on their own. And then children, for every child you get an extra £70 a week, with £50 a week for if you've got more than 2 children for every subsequent child. It would decrease incrementally if you earn more than £50,000 a year. And the whole point of universal basic income is it means that the wealth of the country, we believe, has been created by generations of your grandparents and their parents' hard work, and that collective wealth, we all deserve a bit of that no single, there might be an entrepreneur, but they don't necessarily, they haven't done that on their own. That is on the back of the infrastructure that's been put in place in our country, of all the hard work that's gone before. So it's a whole new way of looking at it, but it's putting money in people's pockets. It means that people can do things like childcare, they can afford to do it, they can afford to study, they can afford to take jobs that may lead to a better job, that kind of thing. It just means that we've got more choice and we can make ethical choices too. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and now finally on this point to Caroline, please.
You're absolutely right. Governments in recent years, political parties across the spectrum in recent years have been looking at, for example, providing, whether it's 25 hours, 30 hours, free childcare to parents in different situations. And I've heard it myself from early years providers is, yeah, that sounds great, but if it's not fully funded, where does the pressure fall? And often that might fall on the wage bill, because the biggest part of any enterprise is actually the costs of staff. Not only is it in terms of their wages they get to take home each week, but obviously small businesses are expected to do pensions and everything else, quite rightly. But it's this tension between aspiration of what governments and politics is saying and then who they expect to provide it. We could turn this on the head and be talking about social care for older people as well. Now, part of my background, interestingly, is as a young mum, I got involved in the Workplace Nurseries campaign, and this was back when Margaret Thatcher, shows how old I am, was Prime Minister, and that government decided to tax the benefit from employers to their staff where there was a workplace nursery, and as a result, that pushed the costs up enormously for parents, and that was a campaign that I got involved in, became chair of the Workplace Nurseries campaign, which then became Working for Childcare. And in fact, you know, it was a tax that we got changed through our campaigning. Under Gordon Brown, I also campaigned when I was, the Labour government, when they tried to affect childcare vouchers in a detrimental way, which then was going to make it difficult for employees to benefit from that. Fundamentally, at the end of all that, are people like yourself, I presume you run a business maybe involved in this area, who have to try and cobble together different ways in which they can provide a service. At the heart of this, and it applies to children, young children, but it also applies to care for the elderly as well, we have to ask ourselves, as a society, what sort of care do we want? Now, I think part of the problem is when it comes to childcare, we keep talking about the national minimum wage. Actually want people looking after our children who are qualified beyond what it would be an entry-level national minimum wage, because these are our children. These are the people who are responsible for the early language these children will develop, for their developmental skills, so that when the time is right and they enter into full-time education in primary, they are equipped. There's a campaign called the 1001 Days, and it's all about the first 1001 days of a child's life being the most important in terms of preparing them for later life, not just in school, but even as adults as well. Unless we get a handle on this, all of us in politics, and recognise you cannot do this on the cheap. Parents alone will not be able to afford the sort of service that we would want for all our children. Government has to step in. And just like the National Health Service, we have to find a way to say this is for the common good. If we do not invest in our children, it's to support their development, or for that matter, women who often pick up the pieces of care for the young and the old, we will never build the sort of society we want to see. If we are expecting people to provide services, they need to be funded to do just that.
So I'd just like to say great thanks to the panel for coming tonight, and some excellent debate, and hopefully you appreciate the range of questions and answers that we got there, which was fantastic. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight, and hopefully you've enjoyed tonight, got lots out of it, and glad you've enjoyed and been entertained, and hopefully on the 12th of December it'll give lots of fuel and food for thought. So if we could just give a round of applause to the panel, thank you.